que estoy en una radio. Ok, gracias. Entonces voy a dejar la puerta abierta. Okay, gracias. Okay, I'm going to leave the door open, but she promises not to.
Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. It's always a treat to have Nancy Spielberg with us. She is talented. She is a filmmaker, producer, executive producer, consultant on movies. She's a philanthropist. She's involved in Jewish organizations, put together some Jewish groups. I remember her from Children of Chernobyl, for example. And she also has something called Jewish Story Partners, where she's helping Jewish filmmakers get their films produced. She has at least 10 films that she's produced. And the latest one, she has Closed Circuit. We'll talk about Vizniak, but the one that I think gets a lot of attention, at least times of Israeli independence, is called Above and Beyond, about Israeli Air Force pilots during the War of Independence. So good to have you back.
Thank you, Zev.
Did I leave anything out?
Well, no, that covered it. Dog lover.
Israel lover.
Definitely Israel lover. Activist, not by choice. You know?
Well, you and your husband, Shimi, I remember years ago, I missed, by the way, the Chabad Shul and Chernobyl dinners, which you were so much a part of. It was a great, I thought it was one of the best dinners of the year, if not the best Jewish dinners of the year.
You know what? It was really wonderful. Those were the days. Those were the days when what we were doing was so worthy. I mean, now the people that we're trying to take out of the Ukraine have a totally different issue than the kids that were suffering from radiation contamination. But yeah, we took a great cause and made sure everybody had a good time giving money away.
It's a shame that I guess they closed down. But your big thing now is Jewish storytelling. You want people to make Jewish movies, right?
You know, I want the Jewish stories to get out there. And by the way, Jewish stories are being made, movies by Jews and non-Jews, because we're such a complex people, and we're all the way to the left and all the way to the right. And we're Jews of color, and we're gay, straight, trans. We're everything, and we're fighting a lot. So really, we have to understand who we are, and maybe that helps us stop with, all the fighting, and to show other people who we are, because maybe that will also help to, anti-Semitism is just rampant, and it's this poisonous cloud that hangs over us. And maybe if there's better understanding of what Jews are about, maybe they won't hate us so much.
Well, there's anti-Semitism in movies too, by the way, and maybe this will be a counterbalance, because I watch anything which has a Jewish content. I'm a Jew, so.
By the way, that's very true, and we've always said, Roberta Grossman, who I work with a lot on a lot of the films, and I always said Jews will watch anything about Jews, even if it's terrible quality. So what we're trying to do is really focus on high production value, wonderful stories that are made well. We don't have to suffer through the crap. There's so many able, creative people out there that are making films. So we don't want to suffer while we watch everything. But yeah, there's a lot of things going on in the Jewish content, which I don't know if you've seen even what Alison Josephs does with Jew in the City,
which is wonderful. And
wonderful what she's doing, because she is not letting Hollywood get away with the anti-Semitic tropes and the stereotyping that you see in You People and some of the Madoff things. So yeah, that's happening.
It's always subtle, like you have a Jewish character who's slimy. They sneak it in lots of times, which is not really germane to the storyline. So, but they put it in, and I'm very conscious about that, and it bothers me. So that's why I'm glad to see there'll be some good, and there's some great movies of Jewish content. But when you see that they sneak in something about, Goldberg all of a sudden becomes a criminal, and
right.
It doesn't have to be Goldberg; it could be anybody. So that's when my antennas go up. And I think
me too. Me too.
But you have a way of influencing things. But before I get to some of your projects, I know you also were involved in the movie that your brother Steven Spielberg, the famous filmmaker, made called The Fablemans. What was
Yeah.
it like? Which it was a fiction movie, but it was based on your history, your family. What
Right.
was it like making this movie about your family and working on it?
Well, it was much more authentic than we were going to admit. I think originally it was going to be based on, that's maybe a bit of a safety, is making, when you do a based on, you've got some wiggle room and you can hide a little. And then it ended up becoming so very accurate in so many ways. I mean, I've seen the film at least 10 times and worked on it and read the scripts, and we worked on the sets, and we rebuilt our homes. We rebuilt the interior of our childhood homes down to the wallpaper, down to the coffee mugs and the paintings on the wall, which my mother painted. So it was so authentic that the pain that it brings me, and laughter, I over and over again. I mean, I sob. I was on a plane. I was on the plane and it started playing on some of the airlines. So I'm trying not to cry openly in my seat so people next to me don't think I'm a wacko. But I relive my parents' divorce. And I also, I enjoy being with my parents again. It's like they come back to life for me every time. So some things were altered, like our age differences is different. And a couple little things were tinkered with, but it was so very true.
Now, you, from what I remember, come from an Orthodox background?
No, not really. Grew up in Arizona with nothing. And then we started to go to day school.
Okay.
Nothing really. I mean, we were treif every single day of the year except for Pesach. And Pesach, for some reason, we were completely kosher. Other than that, we were, eating all the bad, good stuff. And then when my sister Sue and I started to go to Phoenix Hebrew Academy, when I was in 5th grade, we started to keep kosher in the house. And slowly, we got more into it. And
Because
my
I remember
stepfather.
a story you told me. I don't know if it's in the movie. There's a great story about where you're having lobster, and it was live lobsters. And I think the rabbi came to your house and you put the lobsters under the bed.
Yes, no, that was a true story. And it wasn't me that put the lobsters under the bed. It was my brother.
Tell us the story. And was it in the Fablemans? Was it in the movie too? No.
No, I think they
Why
left the
not? That was a
They
great.
were going to. It's funny because as I was sitting on the set, I was sitting with Tony Kushner, and he kept asking questions because he and Steve wrote this together. And at one point I said to him, my mother always said guilt is a wasted emotion. And he was like, I need to put that in the script. So there's so much that wanted to go into the script that couldn't get in the script. Maybe there was no place for that lobster story.
That's a great story.
It was around the time of my brother's bar mitzvah in Phoenix, Arizona. And the Rabbi Greenberg, came to visit us. And as he pulled into the driveway, my mother was just about to drop live lobsters into a giant pot of boiling water in the kitchen. And she saw him pull into the driveway, and she totally panicked and ran down the hall with the lobsters and threw them at my brother and said, hide this, the rabbi's here. So Steve threw them under the bed. And then, of course, the rabbi went to Steve's room to talk about his Torah portion for his upcoming bar mitzvah. So that sort of plan backfired. The rabbi did not see them, but Steve kept having to kick them back under the mattress because they were trying to scramble out from under the bed. So yeah, it was one of those times.
I think it would have been great. Maybe it has to put it somewhere in some movie. I think it's a great
I
thing.
know. It is a good scene. It's
better
sort of
than
like
the
that
monkey
Annie
scene.
Hall. Do you remember that scene in Annie Hall with Woody Allen where they got loose in the kitchen? Sort of like that, but we were hiding them from the rabbi.
Because the monkey story made it into the movie, right? What's the monkey story?
Yes. My mother bought us a monkey when I was 9 years old, when we moved to Northern California. And we were at what was then called Yellow Front or White Front. It was like the Walmart of those days. And they had a little pet department. And the family was there on a Sunday walking around buying things. And this little monkey was for sale. And we fell in love with him. And he was very sad and depressed in his cage. And every day we went to visit him. And then my stepfather, Bernie, who was not then my stepfather, sent us a check for $200 and said to my mother, go buy that monkey. And she did. She came home with a monkey, which changed our lives for about a year.
But did you debate monkey's not kosher? Should you bring it into the house?
No, that part, no.
Oh, that
Because
was made up for the movie?
we weren't even kosher then, so it didn't like make a difference. No, and that monkey was basically a vegetarian and had better food than I did.
So you went to Hebrew school. That's your brother Steven Spielberg also went to Hebrew school?
No, so when my parents divorced, so we just went to regular public schools. We were like the only Jews there. And we were sent to Sunday school until we all said, absolutely not. We hate Sunday school and we wouldn't go anymore. And Sunday school anyway in Arizona was sort of a joke. Like, you had a coloring book with a picture of Noah and the animals, and that was it. You passed if you could color in the lines. And then when my parents divorced, we three sisters moved back to Arizona with my mom. And that's when Sue and I, the two youngest, went to Phoenix Hebrew Academy after it started. So
Stephen was
didn't
not
really.
He didn't go. Is that a conscious decision that he didn't not to send?
He was older. Well, first of all, he was older, and he
Okay.
stayed in California with my dad. And it wasn't really in our orb. Bernie, my stepfather, was raised in an Orthodox home, and he helped start that school in Phoenix. So he said, "Would you guys like to go?" And Sue and I were the only ones living at home, and we were never comfortable in public school. We always felt like the outsider. We were called dirty Jews. So we said, got to be better than what we're going through. And we tried it, and it was perfect. It was actually what really started our Jewish education.
Because you're yourself Orthodox today.
Yeah.
Obviously, yes. Yeah. And in fact, your mother, Leah, had a kosher restaurant, the Milky Way. I remember going there years and years ago.
We still have it, and I'm running it from a distance. And it's all about her, and it's beautiful. It's denim. It's like, how she used to wear jeans and her white collared shirts. So it's beautiful. Looks like her. There's pictures of her everywhere. There's her famous recipes and better other things. And there's a home movie that plays in the corner, which is very much like the Fablemans. You'll see the scenes in that home movie that Michelle Williams portrays in the film.
We're speaking with the very talented Nancy Spielberg. She is a very accomplished filmmaker, producer, director in her own right, over 10 films. And we've been talking about The Fablemans, which is a film that she also consulted with her brother, Steven Spielberg. And she has lots of different films, including Above and Beyond and Closed Circuit as well. She's a philanthropist. So you have a Jewish feeling. You went to the school. What about your brother Stephen? Did I think he came to more religious observance as time went on. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think, Steve felt the anti-Semitism that we all did. I mean, you see in the Fablemans, he got beat up in Saratoga High. And I think Steve became a really good Jew when he did Schindler's List. So that's later in life. Steve was always a good Jew, but not an active Jew, and not quite understanding maybe what the Holocaust, what it was really about. I mean, he knew bits and pieces while I grew up with no knowledge, because he was born in Cincinnati and my grandmother there used to teach Holocaust survivors English. So he had a little bit of exposure, but I think Schindler's List, the making of, changed him completely. I really do. I think that made him a wonderful, caring Jew that wanted to preserve our stories, that is just got a much better understanding. Every once in a while, when I hear my brother now, when he peppers his vocabulary with Yiddish words, or like one time we were all together and he was like, "Let's bench," and I was like, "Let's bench, Steve? When did you start saying let's bench?" So he's getting more and more Jewish the older he gets.
Does he come to you for Pesach for the Seder?
Pesach, we're all together, and it's so wonderful. Yeah.
It's nice. It
is wonderful. Mostly when your parents aren't around. You want, as siblings, it's tougher to stay close, and I think we're closer than ever.
Aside from the movie The Fablemans, have you and him collaborated in the other films?
Only in early years where we were in his films, and we were sometimes extras on Close Encounters or things like that. But no, we sort of went our own ways. And when I did Above and Beyond, he kept trying to give me advice, and I kept saying, "No, I'm good, Steve." He's like, I have a composer to do your score. I was like, I got somebody already. So
Now, you mentioned Above and Beyond, which is a movie about the Air Force of the NASA at the beginning of the state of Israel. Tell us about the film. It's evergreen. You can be shown year after year.
Yeah, I think that's one of my proudest babies. That's the baby I'm most proud of right now. Probably because it was also my first foray as a producer, where I had to, take the bull by the horns. I was petrified. Am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to make a great film? Am I going to fail publicly? But the story's about these Americans. I told the American story. These Yankee boys after World War II, they came back. They survived fighting for the good old US of A. And then for many reasons, they got involved in smuggling airplanes and arms to Israel when Israel was about to declare itself a state, and everybody knew there was going to be a war there, and Israel had no way to defend itself. And so here were these flyboys, this band of brothers that most of them, some of them had changed their names away from Jewish names because it only got them beat up in school, because anti-Semitism in the 30s was terrible. In the army, it was terrible. They were called all kinds of names. And they found themselves in this fight for justice, but then found also their Jewish pride and realized that Israel was, critical to the Jewish people. So it was just the most incredible experience for me interviewing all these guys, these pilots. They were 90-year-old Top Guns, and with a lot of character and a little crazy and chasing women. And it was just a wonderful experience. And it really makes you feel proud to be a Jew.
Because they were not observant, they were not really that connected, but yet when Israel was formed, they felt a connection.
They were not connected. Only one of them, the guy I call the bad grandpa, Giddy Lichtman, he's the one that sort of talks about all the women he picked up, and he has some very salty language in the film. I actually had to make a PG version of the film for some of the communities that wanted to watch it, where they didn't want to hear all the swear words. He was the only one that his father had him raising money to send to Israel with a little blue box on the streets in the 30s.
But
the
the
other
fact
ones
that
were not.
they flew the planes for Israel made their connection, right?
Yeah.
So they were not connected, but they're connected by flying the planes for Israel.
Right.
So you have some great stories, including, I think, one of them either was shot down and was bailing out, and they were being questioned. And tell that story. It's a great story.
This story, when I first started to research the story further, someone said to me, our lawyer in Israel said, I'm very close with Shimon Peres, and he was very close with Al Schwimmer, who was the American that was sort of the mastermind of gathering his buddies. Maybe you can talk to him. I said, can you get me an appointment with Shimon Peres? He's like, yeah. So they gave me a 20-minute appointment, and they said, you have 20 minutes, and he's got people lined up. So I went, I wasn't filming. I was just talking to him, and he starts telling me stories. And one of the stories he told me, he said, that guy, Pee Wee Herman? I like that Shimon Peres even knows who Pee Wee Herman is, was sort of a shocker. He goes, well, his father, Milton Rubenfeld, was one of the pilots. And when Israel didn't know that these Americans had smuggled in airplanes, so any planes flying over Israel were enemy planes because Israel had no planes. But these guys had smuggled in planes, 4 planes, and Milton Rubenfeld was flying a mission, and he got shot down towards the north. He got shot down by an Iraqi plane because Israel was under attack. The skies were owned by the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and the Iraqis, not the Jews. And he got shot down, and he bailed out. And he bailed out on a beach in shallow water. He actually thought he was drowning until he realized his feet could touch the sand. And then he walked into shore, and coming at him was a group of kibbutzniks that saw the plane and saw the parachute. And he was so excited, and the kibbutzniks saw and thought he was an enemy. So they started to shoot at him, and he couldn't speak Hebrew. So he puts his hands up in the air and he starts screaming, gefilte fish, matzah, gefilte fish, just to tell them I'm on your side. And then they stopped shooting at him. So gefilte fish saved his life. And Shimon Peres is the first guy that told me that story.
That's a great story.
I know.
Now,
gefilte fish saves lives, not just
exactly. It's a good thing if he went a Sephardic individual, but into something else.
Yeah, he could. Yes,
he couldn't use gefilte. Abuka, right. Today, yes. Then was more Ashkenazi oriented. Now, when they smuggled the planes to Israel, who did they report? Did they report it to the Haganah?
So it was difficult, actually. They reported to a guy Remez, who was then the Israeli in charge of the Air Force, and the Americans were hard to control because they walked in there saying, "We know what we're doing. You guys don't even know how to fly a plane." Like there were two pilots in Israel, Ezra Weitzman, Modi Alon. And Modi Alon eventually became a commander and very young, but he had a lot of respect. So since there wasn't a lot of coordinating of the
We're speaking with Nancy Spielberg. She's a talented filmmaker, and she has over 10 films that she has produced, directed. She's also a philanthropist, started Jewish organizations, and we're talking about some of her films that she made, including about the Americans who volunteered for the Israeli Air Force in the beginning of the State of Israel, and the movie's called Above and Beyond. She also has Jewish Story Partners, a Los Angeles-based nonprofit that helps support filmmakers who are telling Jewish stories. Movies include that coming out, Closed Circuit and Vizniak, and she's been so much involved in the Jewish scene. And as I mentioned earlier, the Chabad Children of Chernobyl were Chabad Children of Chernobyl was one of the projects, the nonprofit she has involved with and she starred in. So, Nancy, so these pilots, American pilots, really didn't have Jewish connection. They just know gefilte fish and they know a few other things. But they were directed, weren't they all asked to bomb the Altalena where Menachem Begin, the Irgun, was bringing weapons into Israel?
Yes, and that's very interesting that you even asked that question, because when we went to interview them, that was not on our list. That was not one of the questions we were going to ask them. In fact, I didn't know much about the Altalena, and they all voluntarily told us the story and how Ben Gurion and Begin, that was almost a civil war in Israel. And Ben Gurion ordered them to fly and to bomb it. And they stood their ground. They said, absolutely not. We did not come here to kill our brothers. So they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't go out in their planes. But they all told us how they stood on the beach and watched it burn. And it's a very, very ugly piece of Israel's history.
So just for our audience, we know when Israel was formed, you had actually three groups. You had the Haganah, you had Menachem Begin, the Irgun, and you had a group, the Stern group that were fighting. But the main groups were you had the Haganah and you had the Irgun, headed by Menachem Begin, and David Ben Gurion gave orders to shoot down the boat, the Altalena, which was bringing weapons to which they needed, but because Ben Gurion didn't want the Irgun to get power, and he was afraid, even though Menachem Begin would never have done it, those who knew Menachem Begin. So that was Israel's shame, that instead of using the weapons to help the state of Israel, they burned the ship. And also Begin escaped it, but that's a dark chapter in the creation of the state of Israel, unfortunately. So you must have been shocked when you heard them talk about the Altalena, that they were instructed to bomb the Altalena.
Yes, I was very surprised. These guys surprised me many times.
What other surprises did they give you?
Well, they told me some stories that, maybe about some of the carousing with women that I didn't expect. And the other thing that was interesting is that they all wanted to talk about their moms. So, you're with these guys and you can imagine, they were between the age of 88 and 92, maybe then. And they're showing me pictures of them, and they're young, and they've got flight jackets, those leather bomber jackets, and they're sexy, and they've got swagger, and then they all want to talk about their moms and how their moms were so upset when they told them they were going off to Israel, that they may get killed, or they're going to lose their citizenship, or go to jail because they were breaking the law in the United States. So that was also a surprise, and I loved hearing how they found their Jewish identity. There's one guy, Harold Livingston, he was a screenwriter. He wrote Mission Impossible and Star Trek. And I loved him. He could never make his father happy. And he was a short guy with a big, ego. And he used to say, I'm helping you people. Like he was telling us how he was talking to the Israelis. I'm helping you people. And then he stopped and said, and then I realized I'm one of those people. It's not you people, it's we. It's sort of like the four sons in Pesach is, what does this mean to you, not me, excluding himself, but realizing really that this embraces all Jews.
No, so did any of them become more observant or even live in Israel?
Yes. So Coleman Goldstein, who's one that you see a little bit, not as much, he stayed in Israel and he became a pilot for El Al for 32 years. I think George Lichter lived in Israel for a while. After Lou Lenart lived in Israel for a while, they started to come back. They started to trickle back to America for different reasons. South African volunteers tended to stay in Israel. They were more Zionistic and more, I don't know, passionate. And the Americans got a little fed up. The Israelis wanted them to sign certain agreements that they would stay, and then they really were going to lose citizenship in America. So a lot of them said, hey, we helped you. Time for you guys to get on your feet. We set up a pilot training school for you. We're out of here. We're going to go home and have a normal life. So a lot of them left.
How many pilots outside that came from outside Israel, whether it's South Africa or United States, were involved in helping the state of Israel when it was first began?
If memory serves me, I think there were about 188 pilots,
Very
but there
nice.
were over 3,000 volunteers from around the world. That was Navy, Army, Air Force, all combined that went, and many risked their lives or were killed. Mickey Marcus is the one that everybody knows.
Cast a giant shadow, right?
Yeah. And he was killed by friendly fire. Vidal Sassoon, if you don't look good, we don't look good. He built an empire over nice hair. He was a volunteer. There were lots.
No, great story. You have another great story dealing with terrorism. Tell me
Yeah.
about that one.
Closed circuit. So 2016, June 8th, at the Max Brenner restaurant at the Serona Marketplace.
No relation, not yet.
What?
No relation. Max Brenner.
No, sorry. If it were, just think of the free brownies you would get.
I'd be in the movie, no, but anyway.
Yeah, right. So in the Serona Marketplace, a very upscale eatery, like a gourmet mall in Tel Aviv, that evening, two 21-year-old Palestinian terrorists dressed in suits and ties and carrying briefcases came in, sat down, ordered their brownies and their Sprites, and then they pulled out guns and started to spray bullets through all the people eating, dining with families, celebrating birthdays, celebrating breaking Ramadan fast. And all of this is caught on closed circuit camera. So a young woman named Talene Bar had made a student film, and she decided to make this into a feature doc. She contacted me out of the blue. And I get a lot of that, like, here's a story and I have a movie. But I watched the 7-minute video that she had done, and what hit me was that I was in Israel on that very night in a restaurant celebrating my birthday. It was the day before, a bustling, crowded restaurant on a Greek bus in Jerusalem. And when I walked out of the restaurant, when there's a terror attack in Israel, everybody's talking about it. And I heard about it, and selfishly, I kept thinking that could have been me. That could have been any of us when we're just out to enjoy an evening and something that's just not in our radar happens like that. And so I was really taken with this film and taken with the people that we interviewed. This young girl whose father was killed, and another guy, Hagi, that picked up a chair and hit the terrorist with it and jammed a gun, and a Muslim man whose three-year-old almost got killed. So all these different stories really affected me. It's almost like an anatomy of a terror attack. Not that we're not seeing it everywhere, but it's really about the trauma, about the post-traumatic stress, and how after all the visible scars are gone, the trauma still lives under your skin. And Israel has to deal with it all the time.
No, it does important to get that message, because film is a wonderful way of getting a message out to the masses, both Jew and non-Jew alike. And as like we discussed before, it's used to promote anti-Semitism, but it also can be used to promote Israel, to promote a positive identity.
Yes,
Jews.
yes, right.
Which leads me to Jewish Story Partners, which is when we began, because you're helping stories about Jews, Jewish stories to come out. How does one get their stories told? What do you look at? How does the process work? And people are going to ask me, can you send it to Nancy Spielberg? So tell the process.
Don't send it to me. First of all, I helped found it with Roberta Grossman, who directed Above and Beyond. She directed, produced Who Will Write Our History, Hava Nagila. She and I worked together a lot. We did On the Map with Donnie Menken about the Maccabi Tel Aviv basketball team. So we're forever raising money. All of our docs are not for profit. And it's tired, it's exhausting, it's difficult. And so we went to my brother's foundation, Righteous Persons. We said, we got to do something. We need a fund to help tell Jewish stories through film. And my brother's foundation said, we used to have money with his foundation for Jewish culture that used to fund films. It closed, and they gave us back money. We've parked it, and let's look into this. So lo and behold, after doing a big study of what is needed, because we're very careful about donor dollars, they put in $1 million, and they got Jim Joseph Foundation, and they got Maimonides Foundation, and Lynn and Jules Kroll Foundation, a lot of foundations, and we're still raising money. And I'm on the board, so I don't choose any films. So right now in these beginning years, these 2 years, we are only taking films that are the producer or director are American. Right now, docs. We will expand it to international. We'll expand it to scripted as well. And as time goes on and we're raising more money. So you go to jewishstorypartners.com, and there's, they tell you how to submit. You have to have some reel. They look at everything, and then they pass it to a jury. And the jury is made up of very qualified and famous filmmakers and historians and rabbis. Huh?
For example, who is your rabbi?
Not my brother. No, but not my brother. But really people that understand all walks of Jewish life. And that includes the Reconstructionists and the Orthodox. It has to include all of us because we all need to be included in one way or another.
And is it only documentaries right now?
Right now, only documentaries. I believe in about, it could be a year and a half, because we're still, we're just rolling out. We'll open it up to scripted as well.
What about Yiddish? I know Yiddish has enjoyed some comeback. Some movies you have some Yiddish in there.
Of course you can. You just have to subtitle it. I can't wait till it opens up to international, because some of the films coming out of Israel are just phenomenal. We have talent in Israel that we used to not have in the olden days. I don't know if you remember olden days of Israel, even their commercials were horrible. Their commercials, their television was horrible. Now they're the ones selling on Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, and they've got incredible content. So I'm waiting for that, but we're still raising money and we're growing.
Is there any movie that you want to make that you haven't done yet so far?
You know what I love? I love the Sephardi stories. I love the stories of the Jewish Arabs in the 40s. I love the stories of there's a book called Spies of No Country by Maddie Friedman. And it talks about the Jews that were kicked out of Arab countries, and they became the first Mossad. They went back into Beirut and to Aleppo and to all these countries undercover because they spoke Arabic fluently. They knew how to morph into that culture without being caught. And just the Sephardi stories are so rich. I think they deserve attention. They deserve a lot of attention, actually.
Actually, you have Sephardic film festivals, but not too many Ashkenazim go to see us, which is a shame.
It's such a shame, yeah, because they're great. They're really great. So, it's sort of on my radar.
Well, we're looking forward to that. Final question. Will you star in any of the movies yourself?
No.
Why?
No, I don't want to be in front of a camera.
So if you did, I don't know, if you had, do you have any actress that would like to portray you? If you had any autobiographical elements?
My daughter Jessica, she's Jessica Katz. She's an actress. She's a lot prettier than I am, actually.
Don't undermine who you are.
I'll take Jessie. Jessie loves to act. She was in Above and Beyond. In fact,
nice.
She was one of there are really no women in Above and Beyond. So we had in the very beginning women lighting torches for a runway and then getting flowers from one of the pilots. So that was Jessie. Right now, she is very pregnant in my house, and she is holding my very first grandchild. So I'm excited. She's going to give birth here, and she lives in Israel. So,
but your grandchild's going to have to be in the film at some point.
I could call it a crawl on roll, since I don't think walking's going to happen right away.
And Nancy, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I know you do
Thank you,
amazing work, and really to make sure that the Jewish story is being told. And
Yes.
and by the way, a lot of the stories you're telling, if you wouldn't be telling it, it would really go down history with nobody knowing about it.
Right. I'll do my best to continue, and we're all going to fight anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. That's what we need to do.
Just before I let you go, since you mentioned that, you on television, they said that you don't really have any Jewish TV series, and in the movies, it's a little bit better than it was. There was a period of time Jews were written out of Hollywood. You had Dirty Dancing, wouldn't even mention the word Jew. There was in the cast, we had other movies like that. I think it's a little better climate today. But are there enough real, even fiction movies? I don't think there's enough Jewish content out there.
We are highly sensitive to it, mostly when we're being attacked. We're such a small minority. I actually love the campaign that Robert Kraft is doing, the Stand Up to Jewish Hate. It's incredible because it's done so beautifully, and it catches your attention. But there is more, but we're a little nervous how people handle us. Some people are complaining about Rough Diamonds, that it's, again, this Hasidic community, that they're crooks, something like that. I did hear there's a Jewish matchmaking program starting on Netflix that people say is wonderful. So
with Rough Diamonds, on the one hand, they portrayed the Hasidic community authentically, even the way Umain, they said it, they were very careful to have, but on the other hand, it's not realistic to have a member who was part of the community who's involved in drugs and crime and stuff like that. Well, it's technically possible, but as a storyline, it's very improbable.
Right.
So that's something which I found disturbing. I like A Stranger Among Us because they portrayed the freedom in a much different light, and that I think was a better one than even Rough Diamonds.
Right. And I liked Unorthodox with Shira Haas. There's nothing can beat Shtisel.
Right. So it was as a happy kind of movie, and when you see Rough Diamonds, it's more of a downer.
Yeah.
They have great scenes, the wedding scenes, and you have the Hasidic singing, which is nice. But when you have the bad characters, also part of the community, it takes away from the film. At least I'm very Jew-centric and Jew-sensitive.
So you have to watch Frisco Kid.
I love Frisco Kid.
Is that the best? I love Frisco Kid.
Wow, that was a great film.
That, and I can watch, we need another Exodus, Frisco Kid, another Fiddler on the Roof. We need something that just plain old feel good and get to know us. We're not
I'm
that
looking
bad.
forward to you. I'm looking for a collaboration, you and Steven, to come up with the authentic Jewish movie.
I'll
waiting.
try. I'll work on it. Okay. That's my homework assignment.
Look, thank you for joining. Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Zev. Thank you. Mwah. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.